As we talked about on this channel, the 2025 NHL Draft is strange. Once we get past the top 6 to 8 prospects in this class, this draft evens out completely, which means that there's going to be a lot of sleepers going way later than they should. So today we're going to go through the players that I think aren't getting the credit they deserve in this year's class, the biggest sleepers of the 2025 draft, going through players that your team could potentially snag for some pretty good value. So which prospects do I think are getting the most undervalued in this class, the ones that could go way later than they should? Well, we're going to be breaking down each and every single one of them here today with a full scouting reports and prospect talk, so make sure you watch till the end for all the draft conversation today, and hit that subscribe button for more draft content just like this as we lead up to the draft in June. It's almost here, and we're gonna have a lot more content to come. Now let's start out these sleepers today with one of the most underrated ones I would say in this class, a prospect that I consider as a lock as a top 15 pick for me, but I think could ultimately slip to even as far down as the second round. Let's talk about Cullen Potter out of Arizona State. Potter's one of the favorites in this draft class for me, though, with the blend of skill and speed and tenacity both with and without the puck. Sure, the size is a bit of a concern, that maybe could move him more as a winger long term, but I thought he was pretty exceptional as a centerman for ASU this year. One of the reasons he might not get the credit that he deserves is because of the point totals for being a smaller forward. You see in 35 games, 13 goals, 9 assists for 22 points in the NCAA, which I think is good considering the context, but for most people isn't going to be eye-popping. But at the U18 World Juniors, where he got a big opportunity, I thought he was one of the US, if not their most effective and consistent forward. He was absolutely amazing in that tournament and really had some great moments, especially in the shift-to-shift basis. I like Potter quite a bit, though, and you got to consider as well, he was 17 years old throughout at least half of the NCAA season, which is pretty impressive to be able to be that young and also get the opportunity he did and thrive with it, I thought. There was a lot of times where he was snake-bitten as well, but I thought in Potter's case, he was creating so much for his teammates, really boosting them up in a major way. But the intensity, the speed especially, this is somebody that I think has skill to be a top 10 player in this draft potentially, but I think might find himself in the late teens, maybe even the 20s, maybe even the 30s when it's all said and done. And yes, I think there is some risk when it comes to Potter. I do want to see him get a little more strong, and that is, I think, the biggest thing that could hold him back. But at the same time, the skill set is so radiant here that if you get him past even pick 15, I think you're getting so much potential value here. And when it comes to the draft, you want to go for talent, and Cullen Potter brings it in spades. As of right now, he's ranked 18th on Elite Prospects consolidated rankings, but I do think when it comes to the draft, when it's all said and done, he's likely to find himself in the 25 to 32 range, maybe even a bit behind that. But I think that's the range where Cullen Potter will end up going just because of the risk involved with him. But at the same time, I think for any of these teams, especially for contenders, to get that type of talent in your pool is a major success. Now let's go on to a much different prospect in this year's class, but somebody that I think could equally drop down in the class for different reasons. Let's go on to Mason West, who is going to be one of the most fascinating prospects to watch in this class. I mean, there's few prospects that could have different trajectories like Mason West can. Really, the only prospect in this class I think comes close is a Roger McQueen in terms of the variance of what he could become. One of the youngest players in this draft class, but 6'6", 207 pounds, and absolutely looks like it out on the ice. He's one of my favorite prospects in this class because he not just has the size, but he has the skating and the speed in his game to really match the offense going forward. I thought he was brilliant in the USHL in the games he played. Only got 9 points in 10 games, but still for somebody that was going into the USHL right out of the high school league in Minnesota, I think that's still very impressive. The potential is just sky high with West, and even though there were some points in the USHL where you want a little bit more maturity in the way he thought the game, I think that will eventually come. But that's not the reason why West is so all over the place. Because if you remember back in Anders Lee's draft year, there was a whole conversation about how he was a high school QB in Minnesota, how that could potentially affect his career path, how he could potentially choose football instead. Well, that's the same way with Mason West. West is a pretty good one. He has apparently multiple D1 offers. He likely won't be a future NFL QB, but will be a pretty decent college QB. So there's going to be a big decision for him coming up, whether to stick with hockey or stick with football, that can make things complicated here. I think if he sticks with hockey, he is a for sure top 50 prospect in this class. But again, that big risk involved is not so much with the player, but what he might choose. I have heard recently that it could come down to the team that drafts him, whether West sticks with hockey or not. Let's say he gets to stay at home in Minnesota, the Wild draft him at the 52nd overall spot. I think it would be pretty likely that West would stick with hockey at that point, but it could be all over the place. I think the draft combine is going to be illuminating for a lot of teams there because West might be in a position to say no to a few teams out there, honestly, and make a decision to go to football instead. So there is a lot of variance here, a lot to look out for, but I think because of all these question marks, West could drop quite a bit in this draft class, potentially especially to the later rounds. And if he chooses hockey, if he sticks with it, I think you could get a pretty awesome middle six, big time power forward here. Now let's go on to a prospect that I have inside the first round, but I think could go more so in the late first / the second round position here. Let's go on to Milton Gastrine, who in this crop of pretty good Swedes at the draft, Gastrine is one of the most fascinating ones too. He is on the younger side with a June birth date, but at 17 years old, he's somebody that I like quite a bit. 6'1", 185 pounds, and a pretty productive season altogether, over a point per game in the junior 20, and in the World Juniors this year at the U18 level, 10 points and 7 assists in 7 games. Gastrine to me is one of the best mixes, especially in the late first round, of projectability as well as potential. He is so good with his physical body, using it in so many different ways, both offensively and defensively. He loves to be a wrecking ball out there, loves to make big hits, make big plays, but he can also quarterback a rush. He can also dangle you out of your jock straps. The consistency, though, is a pretty major issue. Shift to shift, you don't really know what effort level you're going to get out of him, so that to me is kind of what might make Gastrine a little bit more of a faller when it comes to the actual draft this year. But in terms of the potential, in terms of what he could be, there's a lot to work on there, I think, with Gastrine that I think kind of gets a little bit undervalued. I think he's going to be a player that some teams absolutely adore, potentially having him inside the top 15, while others potentially have him in the later second round. I think there's going to be a lot of variance on this player when it comes to the actual teams themselves, but Gastrine especially, I think, is somebody that I would not be surprised to see as a big riser or a big faller. We'll just have to wait and see. One player that I think is extremely projectable in this year's draft, but is someone that I've seen a lot more in the late second round, which I don't really agree or really see whatsoever, and that is Cole McKinney out of the NTDP. To me, pretty by far, I would say, my favorite player in the NTDP this year. He's someone that is just so safe, but also just has so many good translatable traits that I think will succeed at the NHL level. You can see 6 foot, 198 pounds. He is somebody that has so much bulk on him, but he also plays such a strong, mature game already. You see in the NTDP, over a point per game with 61 points in 60 games. He didn't absolutely dominate the U18 World Juniors, but played the Cole McKinney game. You don't really notice him a whole lot, but he just gets the job done in so many little areas with forward checking, with the physical prowess, how smart he is, how good of a turnover player he is as well. He's just somebody that does so many of the right things out there, and I see pretty easily becoming a projectable middle six center at the NHL. Not an overwhelmingly great one, not a top 6 one, I don't think, but I think as a third line center at his peak, I think that's what McKinney can become. And for the type of player like that is so safe, so projectable in this year's class that has so many questions, so much variance, he pretty easily gets inside the healthy 20s for me. But as you see in the consolidated ranking, 34, and some of the rankings out there as well, in the 50s, which I think for a player as good and as competitive as McKinney is just undervaluing him. He's someone that I think at this point is pretty likely to end up in the second round at the very least. I think more so in the 40 to 45 range, but I think that is an excellent position for a player like McKinney and somebody that I think would just bring yourself an NHL player. I think you're getting somebody projectable out of him, and if you're looking for a center in the future, McKinney checks just so many boxes for you that you want as a bottom sixer. Now, somebody that is a much different centerman, but somebody that I think also is in the similar range to McKinney for me, in Erik Nilsson out of Sweden, and he is somebody that I think is also going to get a lot less value on the draft when it's all said and done than he deserves. I think most likely he'll end up as a second rounder, maybe middle of the second round, but the potential with this player is just so sky high to me. I wouldn't say in terms of the puck skills or anything you're getting a Connor McDavid type of player, but Erik Nilsson is one of the smartest players in this draft, and to me, in terms of the play style, is one of the most projectable. You see in the junior 20, just over a point per game, but solid in the playoffs, and in the World Juniors had 5 points in 7 games. Another similar situation to McKinney, where the smarts there, the maturity in his game, and how much he is able to improve his teammates, I think is what makes me such a believer in him. He's just such a smart player all over the ice and does so many of the right things, especially on the rush, where I think he's one of the more underrated forwards, especially coming out of Sweden this year. The big problem, though, is the size, because McKinney, 198 pounds, Erik Nilsson, 154, and that is a pretty major difference, and for a player like Nilsson, is a bit of a problem when you want to drive play up the middle. You need as much strength and as much power as humanly possible, whereas for Erik Nilsson, I think that's kind of the big thing holding him back from an NHL future. That to me is the biggest reason why I think we will see Eric Nielsen's drop on draft day, unless a team like Vancouver decides they really love him. That's one of the only situations I could see potentially going after Nielsen in the first round. I just think because of that lack of size and true grit with his play style, even though he wants to play that way, I think teams are going to get a little bit scared because of that. My big thing, though, is that Eric Nielsen is going to Michigan State University next year, and if you're trying to bulk up, man, if you're trying to go anywhere to get strength, there's really no better place than Michigan State University that is going to potentially turn Eric Nielsen into a beast. So to me, I already liked Eric Nielsen a lot, but I wanted to see more strength. I wanted to see more bulk out of him. He's going to pretty much the best place to be able to accomplish that and gain muscle over the next few seasons. So even though this is somebody that I think teams will be scared of, that could potentially drop in the second round, this is easily a first round talent to me, especially if he's able to get to 170, 180 pounds. This guy could become lethal. Now, we just talked about the NCAA with Michigan State University. Let's stay inside the Big Ten here and go on to our first overager on the list, but not the last, actually. I think this is actually a really strong overager draft. I mean, you have a player like Christian Epperson, who we didn't mention today, but is somebody that I think will likely be a second rounder in this draft. The best one, though, for me personally, as of right now, is Charlie Serrato. And this is somebody that I think is going to be an exceptional sleeper when it comes to draft day, because as you can see, the only place ranking him right now is NHL Central Scouting among North American skaters at 110, which I think is blasphemous. Now, you see, of course, 20 years old, and yes, he is pretty old for this draft class, but I don't think there are many players out there that are more projectable in what Serrato does, especially in a draft class like this. And again, has all the questions out there. Serrato has been unbelievable the last couple of seasons, and I think is pretty easily worth it. I mean, he's somebody that I think should have gotten drafted last year, honestly, after a great season with Youngstown of the USHL, 50 points in 45 games. This last year, though, 42 points in 38 games for Penn State. He was unbelievable. I do think Serrato is definitely jumping up the draft, but I think it's more so a 4th, 5th round pick just because of the double overager status. That's something that I think teams are just going to be kind of worrisome about. They're going to want to go for a younger type of piece. But in the case of a player like Serrato, who's already physically developed as much as he is, as translatable as he is, and brought so much skill in his first season in the NCAA, to me, Serrato is absolutely worth a top 64 pick to me. And I think for a team that ends up getting him in the 4th, 5th round, I think you're getting one of the best players simply put in this draft class immediately. Another overager in this draft class I think will also go pretty underrated when it comes to the draft day, and is somebody that could go all over the place when it actually comes to the draft, is Bruno Idzon, who isn't yet in the NCAA, but will be in the NCAA this next year with the Wisconsin Badgers. He's somebody that isn't a double overager like Serrato, but is an overager, but is somebody that I honestly think is also one of the more undervalued ones. Now, again, the only place that ranks him is NHL Central Scouting among North American skaters at 67. So with that being said, he probably will end up in the 4th, 5th round most likely. But I think Idzon is one of the most interesting just revelations over the past 2 years. I mean, he's somebody that was playing in the Junior 20 as soon as 2024 and was barely scoring there. He was playing in the Alps Hockey League last season, but this year in the USHL of the Lincoln Stars, he was transcendent. One of the best offensive players in the entire league. In 36 games, getting 22 goals, 22 assists, 44 points. The goal scoring, especially with Idzon, is one of the most important parts of his game. The tenaciousness, the power forward game he brings. He's just such a complete player already, but really has bulked up over the last couple of seasons, and that's helped his game in a lot of key areas. Again, I know I'm sounding like a broken record right now, but because of how interesting and all over the place this draft class is, I think that leaves a slot open for overagers like Idzon, who might not have gotten a lot of attention before, but I think will definitely be getting a lot of attention now. I mean, the production is obviously incredible for the USHL, but it's how he was doing it, how prolific of a goal scorer he was, how efficient he was in the offensive zone. He's just something I think a lot of teams are going to like, potentially as a third liner in the future. There is still a lot of room to grow and ways to go for that offense to catch up. But he's somebody that has really been an improvement over the past couple of seasons, and I think a lot of teams will be taking notice. But again, you have players like Serrato, Idzon, who I think could both potentially be 4th, 5th, 6th rounders, potentially. I mean, that type of value to me is sky high. And in this draft, in those type of positions, I don't think you're getting many future NHLers whatsoever. Guys that come close to even what Idzon or Charlie Serrato have been able to do in their respective seasons. So to me, it's worth taking the gamble on these two guys and seeing what happens. happens, especially after round 4. Now, another player that I think will go pretty undervalued in this draft class, but we go on to the goaltender position here. Let's go on to my number 1 goaltender in this class, in Alexi Medviv out of the London Knights. Now, to me, in terms of this goaltending landscape of the draft, I think it's honestly completely different than what I see in the public and what we see in mock drafts and everything. You obviously have players like Joshua Ravensburg and Jack Ivankovic as the 2 goaltenders that get the most attention in this draft class. But to me, that's just not what lines up in terms of my personal view. Medvedev, to me, is the best in North America, for sure. But the goaltending from Russia in Pyotr Andronov and Semyon Vrolov, those 2 guys, to me, are also pretty high up in my rankings. Medvedev, though, is the highest and is reaching around that top 50 range for me for some pretty critical reasons. I mean, you look at it, he's one of the youngest players in this draft class, not even just in terms of goaltending, but a September birth date. But he was somebody that was unbelievable for London this year. I mean, in 34 games, got a 2.79 goals against average, a 912 save percentage. Sure, he hasn't been playing in the playoffs, but I think a lot of that is just because of his youth. And I think he's somebody that also has been growing in the size department, 6'1", 165 pounds. That's maybe the big thing against him, but the technical game, how mature he is already for his age, he's something that I come to like quite a bit. Not close to a first round talent, I would say, but especially if you're going to get him in the late second like he's projected right now, 65th in the consolidated ranking, touching into the 3rd round, to me that's a slam dunk pick to make if you want a goaltender of the future. Now let's move on to another OHLer here, and another one kind of like Cole McKinney, that I think is one of the more projectable players, especially outside of the 1st round, and a player that I'm kind of surprised isn't getting more attention, and that is Ethan Zeta, who, like some of the prospects we talked about on this list already, is on the younger side as a May birth date, but at 6'1", 174 pounds, he's one of the most projectable centers in this draft class. The points aren't spectacular, but Niagara wasn't spectacular in a lot of ways. You can see in 68 games in the OHL this year, 21 goals, 34 assists for 55 points, and was pretty solid at the U18 World Juniors. Not overwhelmingly good, but played a pretty strong role, and that's what I see Zeta doing at the NHL level. I think he isn't much of an offensive creator, more of a play finisher when it's all said and done, but is somebody that is just so good with the balance of the game, so good in the face-off department, so good with his strength, so good in the forechecking and the intensity all over the ice. He's just somebody that I think will be a pretty perfect 4th line center at the NHL level. And again, with this draft class not having a ton of projectability and for sure attributes, Zeta, I think, brings a pretty complete NHL project. Somebody that I think will be an NHLer. It's just a matter of how many points he'll score. I don't think it'll be too many. I think you're looking, again, kind of like a 20-25 defensive centerman in the NHL, but a pretty strong one. In most drafts, a player like this wouldn't even be touching my top 50, but because of how weird it has become, he's something that I think is rising up in my 2nd round. I mean, if he's something that is available around the 50 range, I think you're getting a potential NHLer, or at least one that has a much bigger likelihood than a lot of the other 2nd rounders in the class. We'll see what he ends up becoming, but I think for Niagara, there's a strong prospect here, and especially for a team looking for more NHL-ready candidates in the 2nd round, Zeta checks all the boxes you could want. Now, moving on to the USHL here, and going to the second to last player I want to mention here today as a potential sleeper for this draft class, let's go on to the USHL and go on to Jacob Rumbach, who is a absolute tank of a defenseman. 6'6", 201 pounds as a commit to the University of Minnesota. But he was somebody that I think has progressed really well in his game with the Lincoln Stars over the past couple of seasons. He's somebody that, especially this year in 57 games, 3 goals, 15 assists, 18 points. I don't think you're getting absolutely massive offensive potential here, but I do think he has a good first pass. I think he can be solid in transition. And for a defenseman that is as effective as Rumbach is, that's all you really need, in my opinion. He reminds me a little bit of an Adam Kleber type, where you're not getting exceptional offense or anything, but I think you're getting a bottom pair defenseman eventually, and a pretty projectable, versatile, and safe one. Somebody that doesn't absolutely sacrifice everything for defense. He can have some offense here and there when he is called upon, and I think for a lot of teams that could be very interesting. But I just think because of the name recognition not really being all too favorable for him, I mean, he's somebody that is still ranked around 71 overall. If he's a 3rd round pick, I think that's easily maybe the most projectable player to be drafted around that range. I will say, even though he is ranked as low as the 3rd round, I would kind of be shocked to see him still available at that spot, considering how well he skates, how decent of a passer he can be out of his own zone, and of course the 6'6" size. I think that will be very interesting for a lot of teams to see what they could potentially get. It is a mystery box, but I think a pretty fascinating one. Now, the last player I want to mention here today as a potential sleeper in this draft, and somebody that we talked about kind of like an Ethan Zeta, in Gustaf Hilstrom coming out of Sweden. Now, we've already talked about a couple of Swedes on this list, and Zeta, I think, Hilstrom is pretty similar to Zeta, I would say, where the projectability and the boxes that are checked there are all there. I mean, 6'2", 176 pounds, one of the more underrated Swedes, I would say, of this entire age group. Something that was below a point per game in the junior 20, but did get a little bit of a cup of coffee in the SHL, which was nice to see. I just think in Hilstrom's case, he's one of the most mature players with the puck and off it. He always knows where to be. The positioning is extremely strong defensively. And I think that's somebody that will project extremely well as a bottom six centerman. Not somebody that will overwhelm you, but somebody who will get the job done in all three zones. And again, I don't think the offense is really there for much more than maybe a 30, 35 point guy. But in Hilstrom's case, I mean, he's something that is ranked around the 60 range. If you get him in the later second round, I think that's a pretty strong pick. And somebody that I think will especially go under the radar for a few years, be a little bit of a project, getting that offense going, but once he does becoming an NHLer, I see eventually having a pretty strong career. I mean, my goodness, as of right now, he's ranked 35th among European skaters, which I don't even understand a single bit. He is way better than that, and I think will get drafted way better than that personally. Hopefully, at least. But those are my sleepers for the 2025 NHL draft class. A lot of talent here that could potentially be unlocked by the right system. I want to know your thoughts down below on my list, what you guys agree, what you guys disagree with, and out of the players we mentioned today, who would you want to have your team potentially go after and draft in this year's class? Let me know your thoughts down below. Let me know your sleepers as well in the comments. And of course, make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell if you haven't already. And share it with all the hockey fans you guys know online. Get the sleepers out to them, and click on this card for every single one of my 2025 draft videos in one playlist for you to binge, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Have a fantastic hockey day, and goodbye.